For decades, humanity has wondered what might be hiding at the very bottom of the ocean. The Mariana Trench sits nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, a place of total darkness where the pressure could crush a submarine like a soda can, and fewer people have ever stood on its floor than have walked on the moon. So when researchers finally sat down to comb through 30 years of deep-sea camera footage, everyone expected the same thing: a monster, a creature never seen before, something pulled straight out of the dark. What they actually found down there was stranger than any monster, and in some ways far more disturbing, because it should not have been possible for it to be there at all. And in the years since, cameras dropped into that same crushing darkness have kept finding things that rewrite what we thought we knew about life at the bottom of the world. The Mariana Trench is not simply the deepest place in the ocean. It is the deepest known point anywhere on the surface of the Earth. Full stop, deeper than any ocean, any valley, any canyon, carved by wind or water above sea level. At its lowest point, a region called the Challenger Deep, the seafloor plunges to roughly 10,135 meters below the surface, close to 35,950 feet, or nearly 8 miles straight down. If Mount Everest were dropped into that same spot, its peak would still sit more than a mile underwater. The trench itself formed through a geological process called subduction, where the massive Pacific tectonic plate slides slowly beneath the smaller Mariana Plate, folding the ocean floor downward into a long, crescent-shaped scar roughly 2,550 kilometers in length, located a couple hundred miles southwest of the U.S., territory of Guam in the western Pacific. Conditions at that depth are almost impossible to describe, in terms a person standing on solid ground could relate to. There is no sunlight at all, not even the faintest trace, because light stops penetrating seawater entirely within the first kilometer. The water sits just a few degrees above freezing, cold enough to be lethal to an unprotected human body within minutes. And the pressure is the real killer, building to more than 1,000 times what we experience at sea level, equivalent to the weight of roughly 50 jumbo jets pressing down on a single person. To survive a trip to that depth requires a submersible built with walls engineered like a fortress. And even with that technology, the list of human beings who have ever actually reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep remains remarkably short, fewer than 30 people in all of history, a number smaller than the number of astronauts who have walked on the lunar surface. If there was ever a location on this planet that logic suggests should have remained completely untouched by human activity, this was it. For more than 3 decades, Japan's National Marine Research Agency, JAMSTEC, sent remotely operated vehicles and submersibles down into the deepest parts of the world's oceans, filming everything their cameras encountered along the way. Every dive was logged. Every strange creature caught briefly in the beam of a searchlight was recorded and archived. By 2017, the agency had compiled this material into what became known as the Deep Sea Debris Database, and for the first time, made more than 5,000 individual dive records publicly available to researchers around the world. A team, led by marine ecologist Shinsuke Chiba, took on the job of combing through this enormous archive to answer a question nobody had ever been able to answer before with this scale of evidence: how much of humanity's trash had actually made it down into the deepest parts of the ocean. The findings, published in the journal Marine Policy in 2018, were far worse than anyone on the research team had anticipated going in. Across those thousands of dives, researchers counted more than 3,000 individual pieces of human-made debris scattered across the seafloor at extreme depths, ranging from discarded metal and rubber to glass and abandoned fishing gear, entire ghost nets drifting silently through the dark like graves nobody ever buried. But one category of material dominated everything else the cameras had captured: plastic. And among all the plastic recovered from the deepest parts of the survey, at depths below 6,000 meters, the overwhelming majority, close to 9 out of every 10 pieces identified, was specifically single-use plastic, the exact kind of disposable material that exists in a person's hands for a matter of minutes before being thrown away entirely. A water bottle, a food wrapper, a plastic bag carried out of a grocery store and forgotten within the hour. As the research team worked their way down through the depth data, sorting dives by how far below the surface each piece of debris had been recorded, one specific discovery eventually surfaced that captured global attention far beyond the scientific community that first identified it. The single deepest piece of plastic debris found anywhere in the entire 30-year archive was a plastic bag, the same kind used to carry groceries home from a store, recorded resting on the seafloor at a depth of 10,198 meters inside the Mariana Trench, within a stone's throw of the absolute deepest point on Earth. Not a shipwreck, not a lost piece of scientific equipment, a shopping bag, sitting quietly in a place of total darkness, near freezing cold and crushing pressure, a location so remote and so inhospitable that fewer than 30 human beings have ever physically been there. Consider what the fact actually implies. We, as a species, struggle enormously just to send a single human being safely down to that depth and back, requiring specialized engineering, years of preparation, and enormous financial investment for each individual mission. And yet a flimsy plastic bag, manufactured for pennies and discarded within seconds of its first and only use, made that exact same journey entirely on its own, carried by wind, by rivers, by ocean currents, sinking slowly for miles through open water until it came to rest in the one place on the planet most people assumed no human trace could ever reach. There was no flag planted at the bottom of the Challenger Deep by that bag, no monument, no scientific milestone attached to its arrival, just garbage, quietly proving that no corner of this planet remains genuinely beyond humanity's reach. There is a detail buried in this discovery that makes it even harder to process. The footage of that specific plastic bag had actually been recorded and archived roughly 2 decades before researchers ever went back through the database and identified what it was. That means the bag had already been sitting on the floor of the Mariana Trench for approximately 20 years by the time anyone recognized its significance, and there is no reason to believe it has moved or degraded meaningfully since. Down in the cold and darkness of the deep ocean, away from sunlight and the warmer temperatures that accelerate plastic breakdown on a beach or in a landfill, plastic can persist essentially unchanged for hundreds, potentially thousands of years. That single bag may very well outlast every person reading this description, and quite possibly their grandchildren as well, a permanent accidental monument left behind not by explorers or scientists, but simply by convenience and carelessness. What makes this discovery move from merely sad into genuinely alarming is that the Mariana Trench, despite everything working against it, is not a lifeless void. Even at these crushing depths, cut off entirely from sunlight, researchers have documented a surprising range of organisms clinging to existence down there. Corals adapted to total darkness, jellyfish drifting through the black water, octopuses and other creatures shaped by evolutionary pressures found nowhere else on the planet. The trench functions as its own fragile, slow-growing ecosystem, home to species that exist in this specific environment and nowhere else on Earth, many of them growing and reproducing at a pace dramatically slower than their shallow water relatives due to the extreme cold and limited available energy. That fragile ecosystem is precisely why the plastic contamination discovered in the Jamstack archive matters so much. Researchers did not simply find trash resting on an empty, sterile seafloor. In roughly 1 out of every 5 images that captured plastic debris, that debris was seen directly interacting with living organisms. Animals physically tangled in discarded fishing line or netting, plastic bags draped directly across delicate colonies of creatures that depend entirely on chemical energy seeping up from the seafloor to survive. Our waste is not simply visiting the deep sea as an inert intruder. It is actively wrapping itself around the life that exists down there, and in one remarkable and almost poetic example discovered in 2020, researchers formally identified an entirely new species of amphipod, recovered from the Mariana Trench, ultimately naming it Eurythanes plasticus, specifically because researchers found a fragment of microplastic fiber embedded directly in the creature's digestive tract at the moment of its scientific discovery. A brand new species to science, and the very first thing confirmed about its biology was that it had already ingested our garbage. The path a piece of plastic takes to end up nearly 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface is, in a strange way, disturbingly simple and mundane. A bag blows out of an open trash bin, or off a beach, or out of the back of an improperly secured truck. It washes into a storm drain, then a stream, then a river, and eventually reaches the open ocean, joining an enormous global flow of plastic waste that scientific research has consistently traced back to a relatively small number of major river systems running through densely populated regions around the world. Once plastic debris enters open water, it becomes subject entirely to ocean currents, and the physical properties of different plastic types determine what happens next. Some pieces remain buoyant and drift for years across ocean surfaces, contributing to visible phenomena like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Other pieces, particularly denser plastics or those that become waterlogged over time, slowly begin sinking, drifting downward for months or years through open water until gravity eventually settles them onto the seafloor, wherever that seafloor happens to be, including, apparently, the deepest trench on the entire planet. Nobody deliberately dropped that bag into the Mariana Trench. No single person or company is directly responsible for its specific individual journey. It arrived there through the accumulated, distributed carelessness of an entire global system, one discarded piece of plastic at a time, and the ocean itself simply carried the rest of the way, something humanity never intended to send that far. The Jamstack debris study reshaped how the world understood humanity's footprint at extreme ocean depths, but it was far from the final chapter in the story of what cameras have found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. In the years since, entirely new expeditions equipped with more advanced submersible technology have returned to these same crushing depths with a very different mission. Not searching for trash, but actively searching for signs of life that scientists suspected might exist, but had never actually documented at this scale. In July 2025, a team of Chinese researchers using the manned submersible Fenduja, meaning striver, published findings in the journal Nature, describing what they identified as the deepest and most extensive community of large marine organisms ever directly observed on Earth. Diving to depths reaching approximately 9,433 meters within the Mariana Trench system, researchers documented dense, thriving colonies of tube worms and clam-like bivalve mollusks stretching across the seafloor. An entire ecosystem existing at a depth previously assumed to be far too extreme to support this scale of animal life. Crucially, these organisms do not rely on sunlight for energy in any way, an impossibility at that depth regardless. Instead, they survive through a biological process called chemosynthesis, drawing energy directly from methane gas, seeping up through cracks in the seafloor, converted into usable energy with the help of specialized bacteria living symbiotically inside their tissues. Researchers observed what they described as microbial mats, resembling patches of snow scattered across the seafloor, evidence of active microbial communities converting seeping chemicals into the biological foundation supporting this entire hidden ecosystem. The significance of this discovery extends well beyond the Mariana Trench itself. Because researchers now have direct evidence that this kind of large-scale chemosynthesis-based ecosystem can survive and thrive at such extreme depths, the research team explicitly noted that similar hidden communities could very plausibly exist in other, less studied ocean trenches around the world, ecosystems that have simply never been observed because so few cameras and submersibles have ever been sent deep enough to actually look. As one researcher connected to the study put it, this discovery strongly suggests that Hadal ecosystems, communities existing in the deepest ocean trenches, may be far more widespread across the planet than the scientific community had previously assumed. Just months before that discovery, in March 2025, a separate but closely related research effort published findings in the journal Cell that revealed an entirely different, invisible layer of life thriving in the same extreme environment. Working through the Minderoo University of Western Australia, an international mere research collaboration involving institutions including Shanghai Jiaotong University, the University of Copenhagen, and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, scientists conducted an extensive genetic survey of microbial life across the Hadal zone, the technical term for ocean depths exceeding 6,000 meters, encompassing the Mariana Trench and similar deep ocean trenches worldwide. The results were staggering in scale. Researchers identified thousands of distinct microbial species living in these extreme depths, and remarkably, roughly 89. 4% of the microbial species identified through this survey had never been previously documented anywhere by science. These are not simply minor variations of already known organisms. The overwhelming majority represent genuinely new branches of the microbial tree of life, entirely unknown to researchers until this specific expedition brought back the genetic samples needed to identify them. The study found that these microorganisms have evolved distinct survival strategies to endure the crushing pressure and extreme conditions of the Hadal zone, with some species evolving smaller, more streamlined genomes optimized for extreme specialization, while others carry larger, more flexible genetic material that allows them to adapt to shifting environmental conditions. Researchers involved in the study have specifically highlighted that genetic material recovered from these previously unknown microbes could hold real practical value going forward, potentially informing the development of new medical treatments, or even technology relevant to supporting human survival during long-duration space travel, given the parallels between the extreme, hostile conditions of the deep ocean and the extreme, hostile conditions of space itself. Even with all of this new research, cameras dropped into extreme ocean depths continue returning footage that scientists are quite literally unable to fully classify. In a related 2026 Hadal exploration effort led by researcher Alan Jameson and colleagues, conducted using the submersible limiting factor across trenches near Japan during an extended expedition, researchers filmed a ghostly, pale, symmetrical organism drifting through the water at a depth of roughly 9,100 meters that they were unable to conclusively identify as any known species. Published in the journal Biodiversity Data Journal, the creature was provisionally logged simply as Animalia incerta sedis, a formal scientific designation essentially meaning an animal of uncertain placement within the tree of life. Researchers noted visual similarities to nudibranchs, a type of sea slug, based on its body structure and antennae-like projections resembling a nudibranch's sensory organs, but stopped short of formally classifying it as such, given how little conclusive evidence exists to confirm what it actually is. That same expedition also documented a wide range of other remarkable confirmed Hadal organisms, including a supergiant scavenging amphipod recorded at 7,000 meters, an eyeless snailfish observed feeding at a record depth of 8,136 meters, and expansive meadows of crinoids, feather-like marine animals related to starfish, carpeting the seafloor at depths exceeding 9,000 meters. Put everything together, and the story of what cameras have actually found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench turns out to be stranger and more complicated than any single monster ever could have been. 30 years of archived footage revealed that humanity's disposable waste, plastic bags, wrappers, discarded fishing gear, had already reached the single deepest point on the planet decades before anyone even realized it, resting undisturbed in a place fewer humans have visited than have walked on the moon, likely to remain there for centuries after we are gone. And yet, in that same crushing darkness, newer expeditions equipped with better technology have revealed an extraordinary, previously invisible world of life quietly thriving under conditions that should make survival impossible. Dense colonies of tube worms feeding on methane, thousands of entirely new microbial species never before documented by science, and creatures cameras still cannot fully identify, drifting silently through water that has never once seen sunlight. The Mariana Trench kept its secrets for billions of years before we ever built a machine capable of reaching it. What we have found there so far is not a monster waiting in the dark. It is proof that we have already left a permanent mark on the one place on Earth we once assumed would always remain beyond our reach, and proof, at the very same time, that we have barely begun to understand what else might still be living down there, waiting for the next camera to finally find it.